This is a case from New South Wales. It was a case that started out with abduction by two guys named Leslie Camilleri and Lindsay Beckett. Now, Lindsay sounds more like a female name, but it was a guy apparently. Leslie Camilleri was born to a family of 6 children in Liverpool, New South Wales. He did not meet his natural father until he was 13 years of age. A psychiatric report prepared in 1993 spoke of Camilleri's deprived childhood and a pattern of theft and vandalism, which have been his reaction to social ostracism, leading to frustration, which, because of poor impulse control, has ended in explosive outbursts of destructive behavior. He was considered uncontrollable as a child and spent a large part of his childhood in juvenile detention. He escaped the institution and between the ages of 10 to 12 lived on the streets of King's Cross in Sydney as a street kid. He was eventually taken before the Children's Court by police in order to return to the institution, where he remained until he was 15. 4 days prior to the abduction of a girl, Rosemary Gandarius, in Canberra, and 3 weeks prior to the schoolgirl murders, Camilleri appeared in the District Court of New South Wales on trial for charges relating to sexual offences against his de facto's daughter. After 2 days, the trial was aborted and Camilleri was released from custody on bail. He had 146 prior convictions for offences such as dishonesty, theft and willful damage. At the time of the murders, he lived in Yass, New South Wales. He had known Beckett for a period of 2 to 3 years and would often associate with him to steal cars. Now, Lindsay Beckett was born in New Zealand and lived in a town of Opotiki before moving to Australia. At the time of the murders, he lived in Yass and had come to associate with Camilleri, 5 years his senior, in criminal pursuits. It would be Beckett who would eventually break and confess to police about the schoolgirl murders and lead them to the bodies of the victims. It was claimed Camilleri exerted a strong influence over Beckett. Now, the sentencing and stuff like that they eventually faced, we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let's look at some of the events that actually took place before the actual murders. On the 3rd of October 1997, a campsite was set up by the father of Nichole Collins at White Rock near Bega for his teenage daughters to invite friends over for the coming Labor Day long weekend. The campsite was located 3 kilometers from the Collins home. The girls would regularly call at the house while camping to change clothing, shower and eat. Collins' father regularly called at the campsite to check on the children and did so on the day the girls disappeared. About 9 p.m. on the 5th of October 1997, Collins, wearing her high school jacket, and her younger friend Barry left a group of friends at the campsite and walked off for a nearby party. A Ford Telstar belonging to Camilleri's de facto partner and driven by Camilleri was nearby with Beckett alongside him in the passenger seat. He had an argument hours earlier with his de facto partner and talked to Beckett about his feelings of depression. He and Beckett were consuming beer and injecting each other with drugs while driving aimlessly. According to Beckett, it was Camilleri who spotted the girls walking single file along the Bega-Tathra Road in Evans Hill and stopped to offer them a lift. At approximately 10 p.m, after a brief discussion with the men, the girls entered the car willingly, according to Beckett. A pink portable television set, which had earlier been taken by Camilleri and Beckett from a friend of a drug-related debt, was removed from the back seat of the vehicle and discarded at the side of the road to provide room for the girls to sit. The television set would later become important evidence and implicate the 2 men in their crimes to follow. Now, Beckett told police the group traveled to the Tathra beach and spent some time there before returning to the campsite at White Rock. On the road leading to the campsite, Camilleri became disturbed at the car bottoming out on the uneven gravel road and became angry at the girls. The rear doors of the vehicle had been previously locked using the vehicle's child locks, and there were no windows, preventing the rear doors from being opened by passengers inside. He grabbed a knife and told the girls they would be stabbed if they tried to escape. Beckett also grabbed a knife and went along with Camilleri in threatening the girls. Whilst Camilleri was going off, he pulled his knife out of a pocket in the driver's door. This was a black-handled pocket knife with a serrated edge. Camilleri turned around to the girls and showed them the knife. He told them to shut up and not to say anything. He said if they did not do what he said, he would stab them. Camilleri apparently told the other guy, Bega, to get his knife, and he said, "I got my knife out of the glove box, and I have a black-handled knife with a jagged edge." I showed the girls I had a knife too. I said to the girls to do as Camilleri says. They then reversed away from the campsite and drove onto another road. Now this is a case where apparently for 12 hours long the girls were raped, and they would be driving around to all sorts of different places in the middle of nowhere while doing these things before they would actually and eventually murder these two young girls, because at the time they were 14 and 16 years old. Keep that in mind. So without going really into the details of the rape itself, because that speaks for itself and is always messed up to even narrate, this is where it eventually got out of hand completely. Final stop about 8 AM the following morning was at Fiddler's Green Creek, located just south of the Victorian border with New South Wales. The girls' hands were tied and they were ordered along a remote bush track over rock terrain to a creek. The group walked alongside the creek for several hundred meters. Camilleri ordered the girls to remove their clothing and wash their vaginas thoroughly to remove any evidence of the prior sexual assaults. After washing, the girls were then ordered to lie on their stomachs before being retied and gagged. They were then separated by a distance of approximately 30 meters, as Camilleri and Bega discussed what to do next. Camilleri demanded Bega drown the girls, but Bega protested, saying it was unfair that he had to kill both. Bega eventually complied when an argument occurred, and Camilleri threatened to stab him if he did not do as he wanted. Bega attempted to first drown Lauren Berry, who was tied up near the creek, after a struggle. He described the scene to police as follows. "I went over to Lauren and dragged her down to the water. I held her head under the water. She was struggling and she knocked me into the water. One of my knees, I think the left, went into the water. This pissed me off a little bit and I opened my knife. It was in my left hand and I stabbed Lauren in the left side of the neck. I said in my interview that it was the right side of the neck with my right hand, but I've been thinking since. It wasn't my right thumb which was cut, but my left. After a couple of seconds after I stabbed her, she stopped moving." Bega then ran up the embankment towards Nichole Collins, who was tied to a tree and out of view of Barry, who now lay dying in the creek bed. Bega slashed Collins to the throat several times, then began to punch and kick her when he realized she had not died instantly from the knife wounds. After I stabbed Lauren, I ran up to the bank to where I tied Nichole. She must have heard what I had done to Lauren, because when I got to her she said, "You're going to kill me, aren't you?" I said shut up and walked around to her left side and I cut her throat 2 or 3 times. This was across her throat. The knife was in my left hand. Nichole was sitting down when I cut her throat. After this, she was thrashing around on the ground. She was trying to scream but nothing was coming out. I think I kicked her because she wouldn't keep still, and then I put my foot onto her to keep her still. This didn't work, so I stabbed her in the throat. I aimed and stabbed at the hard thing in her neck. I pushed the knife all the way in it, but she still wouldn't keep still, so I worked out where her heart would be and stabbed her on the left side of the chest. She still didn't stop moving, so I stabbed her in the front of the chest. I was aiming for her heart. I needed 2 hands to get the knife through her chest. She kept moving, so I kicked her in the head a couple of times. She still kept moving, but she was slowing down. I waited until she stopped moving, which didn't take long. After the murders, Camilleri, who was not present during the murders and was waiting in the car, asked Beckett, "Did you see the demon?" The pair quickly left the crime scene with Beckett driving and returned to New South Wales. Now they drove from the murder scene while Beckett slept in a vehicle and woke as the pair approached Canberra. They stopped at the Theodore Lookout on the Monaro Highway to the south of Canberra and burned their blood-stained clothing, ropes and gags used to restrain the girls. The knives used by the pair were later thrown from the Commonwealth Avenue Bridge into Lake Burley Griffin before returning to their homes. On the 8th of October 1997, he and Bega drove from Yes to Sydney and stayed with Camilleri's brother for several days. While in Campbelltown, in Sydney Southwest, they spent 6 hours cleaning the car at a car lover's car wash, going as far as removing the vehicle's seats and carpets to clean them thoroughly. The pair then returned to Canberra to destroy further evidence before returning to Bega on an unsuccessful search for the discarded pink television set, which Camilleri believed would lead police to them as the abductors of the missing schoolgirls. The television set was earlier removed by a local council worker. That's an absolutely disgusting case, isn't it? It's pretty similar to that other one that happened in Spain that I shared a few days ago, if you think about it. It's also girls that were basically hitchhiking with two guys, as the case claimed, and then were brutally raped and murdered. I guess the same was true for these girls. They were raped for a couple of hours while they were driving around, and then I guess they also weren't necessarily murdered instantly. It seems a bit of a torture that was going on here. Then at the same time, they probably didn't know how to properly murder anyone, because it seems they were trying to do it, but they were really messy with it, which sounds realistic actually for people who really have no idea what they're doing. Well, it's absolutely disgusting that these two young girls were raped by these two older guys. Now thankfully they were of course arrested, and this happened on the 25th of October 1997. Police located a car earlier stolen by Beckett in Canberra. The vehicle was searched and police discovered maps of the Bega area and items belonging to Beckett. Members of the Australian Federal Police arrested Beckett on the 27th of October 1997 on car theft charges and remanded him in custody. They interviewed Camilleri the following day. Both men denied any knowledge of the girl's abduction and murder. The pair also denied discarding a television set by the roadside. However, Camilleri admitted traveling with one that he had dropped at a St. Vincent de Paul store. On the 12th of November 1997, police again interviewed Beckett, who made a full confession. He agreed to take police to the crime scene at the Fiddler's Green Creek, where the remains of the girls' bodies were discovered. Now, the trial information itself is never really that interesting, at least to me it isn't, because it's a clear-cut case that these guys were definitely the guilty ones, because they had all the knowledge about the crime scene and made a confession about it. I don't believe this was a false confession like sometimes might happen. It all sounds like too much of a coincidence. So let's just say that they got charged and got exactly what they deserved. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for Leslie Camilleri, and for Lindsay Beckett it was 2 times life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 35 years. And it got me thinking, because in America you do have the death penalty, but like some people say, if you give these people the death penalty, it's still an easy way out for them. So if you keep them behind bars, they might suffer longer. But the problem here with that statement is obviously that they still have a sort of decent living. I know they might get in trouble with other inmates all over the world when you're locked up, but the fact still remains, they still have a proper roof and stuff over their heads. So I can imagine if we tweak that system a little bit into something more morbid, then maybe people would be more scared of breaking the law with brutal murders like this, because after all, if you murder someone like this, the way they did in the Netherlands for example, I know you would get life imprisonment and nothing else. We don't even have the death penalty in this country. And as far as I know, in Australia it's the same case, right? They abolished all these penalties. But then if you still have a great place, you could say almost to live for free, maybe it's not enough suffering for all these freaks in the end. Leave your thoughts about this case in the comment section below if you have anything to say about it. I hope these 2 girls are resting in peace. It's absolutely horrifying what they had to endure before dying. Can't believe that this sort of shit happens all over the world. Anyways, as always, dear viewer, have sweet dreams.